In July 1990, after years of escalating tensions, Iraq began threatening military action against Kuwait, driven by a mix of political, economic and territorial motivations. Iraq was burdened by massive debts following its prolonged and costly war with Iran from 1980 to 1988, including significant sums owed to Kuwait and other Gulf states. Iraq accused Kuwait of overproducing oil, which depressed global oil prices and slashed Iraq's revenue from its own exports. Additionally, Iraq alleged that Kuwait was engaging in slant drilling into the Rumaila oil field, which straddled the border between the two nations, effectively siphoning oil that Iraq claimed as its own. By invading Kuwait, Iraq sought to gain control over Kuwait's substantial oil reserves, which would have made Iraq the dominant oil power in the region. Iraq's threats and aggressive rhetoric in the months leading up to the invasion were seen as merely posturing rather than actual plans for military action. The Kuwaiti government believed that diplomatic and economic pressures would be sufficient to resolve the disputes. But on August 2, 1990, Iraqi forces invaded Kuwait. The scale and speed of the invasion caught the Kuwaiti military completely off guard, with many of its personnel away on leave, hampering its ability to put up a coordinated defence. At the time, the Iraqi army was the fifth largest in the world. Its military was well equipped, fielding some of the latest Soviet technology. Its troops were experienced combat veterans, having spent 8 years at war with Iran. Faced with a superior force, the defenders were unable to repel the invasion. Within a single day, Iraqi troops had captured the Kuwaiti capital, Kuwait City, and established control over the country. The Kuwaiti government and military were quickly forced to flee to Saudi Arabia. Kuwait was now under Iraqi occupation. The invasion was internationally condemned. On November 29, 1990, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 678. It gave Iraq a deadline of January 15, 1991, to fully comply with all previous UN Security Council resolutions, particularly Resolution 660, which demanded Iraq's immediate withdrawal from Kuwait. If Iraq failed to comply by the deadline, the resolution authorized UN member states to use all necessary means to uphold and implement Resolution 660. It was the first UN authorization of force since 1950, when a resolution was passed for military action against North Korea after its invasion of South Korea. On August 7, 1990, deployment of coalition forces to Saudi Arabia began as part of Operation Desert Shield. The operation's primary goal was to protect Saudi Arabia from potential Iraqi aggression and to prepare for the possible liberation of Kuwait. Desert Shield saw one of the largest military build-ups since World War II. Over 500,000 US troops were eventually stationed in the region, alongside tens of thousands of troops from coalition partners. The operation included significant naval and air components. USS Saratoga, alongside 5 other US Navy aircraft carriers, was swiftly deployed to support the operation. Aboard the Saratoga, as part of Carrier Air Wing 17, were VFA-81, the Sunliners, and FA-18C Hornet Squadron. Developed by McDonnell Douglas and Northrop, the FA-18 Hornet is a versatile, all-weather, carrier-capable fighter attack aircraft. Introduced in the late 1970s and early 1980s, it provided the US Navy and Marine Corps with a highly adaptable multi-role platform. As one of the first aircraft to feature multifunction displays, the Hornet offered pilots exceptional situational awareness and the flexibility to seamlessly transition between air-to-air and ground attack missions at the touch of a button. It streamlined and modernized the roles previously covered by older aircraft such as the F-4 Phantom II and A-7 Corsair II. Its design prioritized reliability and maintainability, making it faster, easier and more cost-effective to operate than its predecessors, requiring only half the maintenance time of an F-14 Tomcat. The Hornet's modular design meant components could be replaced much quicker. A crew of only 4 could replace one of its G404 engines in just over 20 minutes. In comparison, an engine change on an F-14 could take anywhere from 8 to 12 hours due to the aircraft's design and the complexity of its systems. With Saudi Arabia covering the fuel costs, the USS Saratoga's Carrier Air Wing was intensely focused on working up, a comprehensive series of training and readiness exercises designed to ensure that the crew, equipment and aircraft were fully prepared for combat and other operational missions. During these preparations, the pilots of VFA-81 found themselves questioning whether their efforts would actually be needed. Many initially believed that diplomacy might prevail. However, as the UN's deadline approached, the likelihood of war seemed to grow with each day that passed. Their mindset began to shift, and their thoughts turned to the enemy and their capabilities. They knew they would be up against a sophisticated, integrated air defense system, but the questions loomed large. How effective would the Soviet-made equipment be? How well trained were the Iraqi pilots? When the January 15th deadline passed without resolution, war, it seemed, was now inevitable. On the 16th of January, the air tasking order arrived, detailing the sorties that would deliver the first strikes of the war. The pilots felt a surge of excitement. They would finally get to do the job they had been training for their entire careers. Yet that initial thrill soon gave way to the sobering reality of what lay ahead. The Iraqi military was a formidable, well-equipped and battle-hardened adversary. For VFA-81 pilots, Lieutenant Commander Mark Fox and Lieutenant Nick Mongillo, their first mission would be a daytime strike on Al Walid Air Base, codenamed H3. Situated deep in Iraq's western desert, about 435 kilometers west of Baghdad, the base was well defended by SA-6 surface-to-air missile systems, anti-aircraft artillery, and patrols of MiG-21 and MiG-29 fighters. That night, at around 11 p.m, as they tried to get some rest before their mission the following day, they could hear the sound of jets launching from the flight deck as their squadron mates took off to carry out some of the first strikes of the war. In the early hours of the morning of the 17th of January 1991, the war began. The coalition's first offensive against Iraq was meticulously planned and executed, targeting key Iraqi military assets with overwhelming force. At 2:28 a.m, 8 AH-64A Apaches carrying AGM-114 Hellfire missiles fired the opening shots of the conflict. They destroyed a pair of Iraqi air defense radar installations, opening up a path into Baghdad for further strikes. Shortly after, F-117A Nighthawk stealth bombers dropped the first bombs of the war, hitting key command and control centres in Baghdad, including government buildings, communication hubs and military infrastructure. These aircraft, with their stealth capabilities, operated undetected by Iraqi radar. Hundreds of Tomahawk cruise missiles were launched from US Navy ships in the Persian Gulf and Red Sea. These missiles struck a range of targets, including radar installations, air defense sites, and military command centers, significantly degrading Iraq's ability to coordinate its defense. Following these initial attacks, a massive air campaign involving over 1,000 coalition aircraft unfolded. US and Allied forces, including British, French, and other coalition partners, attacked a wide range of targets across Iraq and Kuwait. The first night of the air war was a significant success for the coalition, with minimal losses. The comprehensive and coordinated strikes severely degraded Iraq's air defense capabilities, setting the stage for the continued air campaign. In the morning, Hornets from VFA-81 began returning to the USS Saratoga. Fox and Mongillo learned that their squadron mate, Lieutenant Commander Michael Scott Spiker, had not returned from his mission the previous night. The skipper of VFA-81 had seen Spiker being shot down by a MiG-25, but had downplayed the incident, withholding the full details from the pilots before their mission. Spiker was the first American casualty of the war. Initially, the Navy reported that he was downed by a surface-to-air missile, but eyewitness accounts and a declassified CIA report in 2001 revealed that he was indeed shot down by a MiG-25 Foxbat from the Iraqi Air Force's 84th Fighter Squadron. After their final briefing, the pilots headed to the flight deck. Taking off from the USS Saratoga in the Red Sea, they flew north over the desert of western Iraq, heading towards their target, H-3 Air Base. They carried 2 semi-active radar-homing AIM-7 Sparrows, 2 IR-guided AIM-9 Sidewinders, and 4 Mark 84 2,000-pound dumb bombs. Accompanying Lieutenant Commander Fox and Lieutenant Mongillo were Commander Bill McKee, VFA 81's executive officer, and Lieutenant Commander Chuck Osborne. 40 miles ahead of them, a flight of 4 F-14 Tomcats were performing a fighter sweep. Meanwhile, about 30 miles to the west, FA-18s were launching tactical air-launch decoys, or TALDs. These decoys were used to lure enemy aircraft away from the strike aircraft and to confuse SAM systems. To the south, other aircraft were launching high-speed anti-radiation missiles, or HARMs, that would overfly the target area. These air-to-ground missiles are designed to destroy enemy SAMs and other radar-guided air defense systems by homing in on their radar emissions. Approaching H-3 from the south, the 4 Hornets flew in a wall formation, line abreast. These were still early days for the FA-18, which had only been operational for a few years. At the time, the standard operating procedures didn't always play into the Hornet's strengths. The pilots were briefed to fly the final 35 miles to the target in air-to-ground mode, a tactic inherited from the A-7 Corsair, whose pilots heavily influenced the Hornet community at the time. Designed as a dedicated attack aircraft, the A-7 didn't engage in air-to-air combat, so it was considered good practice to have all switches set for ground attack well in advance. However, this approach blunted the advantages of the Navy's new multi-role fighter. In air-to-ground mode, the Hornet's radar defaulted to scanning the ground rather than the airspace ahead, making it less effective at detecting potential threats. This tactic would later be revised based on the lessons learned during the Gulf War, with pilots switching to air-to-ground mode only right before rolling in on a target. As they pushed deeper into Iraq, they heard other radio chatter. 2 MiG-29s, the most advanced Soviet-made fighter at the time, were stalking a strike package from USS Kennedy. Unknown to the MiG-29s, they themselves were being tracked. An E-3 notified the F-15s, providing top cover for the strike group. Almost immediately after picking up the MiG-29s on their radars, the F-15's radar warning receivers sounded. They were being locked by a SAM system. They jettisoned their tanks and began evasive maneuvers. Deploying countermeasures, they managed to break the enemy radar lock. Now out of the threat ring of the SAM, they caught up with the 2 Iraqi Fulcrums. The MiG-29s suddenly maneuvered aggressively, but not against the F-15s. They were engaging an F-14 Tomcat. The MiGs had no idea the F-15s were there. Realizing they had got the drop on the MiGs, the 2 F-15Cs, one piloted by Marine Captain Charles Sly McGill, who was on exchange duty with the Air Force's 58th Tactical Fighter Squadron, the other by his wingman, Captain Rory Hoser Drager, both fired Sparrow missiles at each of the MiGs. McGill was worried his first missile had malfunctioned and fired a second Sparrow. But both of his missiles found their target, as did Drager's, destroying the pair of MiG-29s. The 4-ship of Hornets were now only 30 miles away from their target. Suddenly, they received a bandit alert from an E-2 Hawkeye.
New picture, bandit 190-20 Manny.
Screaming towards them head-on at Mach 1.2 with 2 Iraqi MiG-21s.
400 bandits on your nose, 16.
200 radar contact on my nose, Mach at 28,000.
The Hornets switched to air-to-air mode and selected missiles. Lieutenant Commander Fox locked up the MiG on the right, Lieutenant Mongillo the MiG on the left. Fox fired an AIM-9 Sidewinder, but being smokeless, it looked like the missile wasn't tracking. He selected an AIM-7 Sparrow and fired. But that first Sidewinder was tracking. The Iraqi fighter exploded in a fireball as the first missile slammed into it. The second Sparrow missile then followed on into the explosion. Just moments after Fox had fired his first shot, Mongillo fired a Sparrow. The AIM-7 missile guided successfully, destroying the second MiG-21. It took only 40 seconds from when the bandits appeared on the E-2's radar until both aircraft were shot down. Shortly after the merge, they picked up radar contacts on additional bogies, heading towards them at around 25,000 feet. They continued on and locked them up. Their HUDs were displaying the shoot cue, but they still did not have confirmation that they were bandits. They asked the E-2 to confirm, but the comms were so busy they never got a reply. At about 5 miles away, the bogies turned north and dived down to the deck. The pilots had to make a decision. Should they jettison their bombs and pursue them? Was it a ploy to get them in range of a hidden SA-6? But looking down, they saw they were now over their target, H3 Airbase. Switching to air-to-ground, they rolled in and successfully destroyed the Sector Operations Center and petroleum oil lubricant facility. With their mission now complete, they egressed to the south. After refueling from the tanker, they flew an hour and a half back to the USS Saratoga in the Red Sea and landed back aboard the carrier without incident. Fox and Mongillo scored the US Navy's only 2 aerial victories over enemy fighters during the campaign. The FA-18 Hornet's performance during Operation Desert Storm was marked by its proven versatility, reliability and effectiveness as a multi-role combat aircraft. Its proficiency throughout the conflict solidified its reputation and influenced its continued use and development in the following decades. The Hornet became the backbone of the US Navy and Marine Corps, replacing older aircraft like the F-4 Phantom and A-7 Corsair. Its contribution to Desert Storm solidified its place as a primary fighter attack aircraft. The FA-18C Legacy Hornets were retired from active service in early 2019, with the US Navy transitioning fully to the more advanced FA-18E and F Super Hornets and F-35C Lightning IIs. Fortunately, the jet's Lieutenant Commander Fox and Lieutenant Mongillo flew that day was saved from the scrap heap and sent to the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida. Upon arrival, the Hornets were in a state of disrepair, missing numerous parts. The museum's Aircraft Restoration Division took on the challenge of restoring them for public display. Using components from retired Blue Angels FA-18Cs, Lieutenant Commander Mark Fox's jet, Bureau number 163508, was the first of the 2 to be restored. Temporarily sporting a patchwork livery of Blue Angels insignia blue and low visibility grey, it was repainted to match the livery it wore during its famous MiG kill over Iraq in 1991.